friends. Thanks for joining me today to paint. So welcome to teachers, parents, and kids who are interested in creating a nice Christmas scene painting. When I first asked if there was interest for something like this on Facebook, I had over 100 responses. So I thought, what better way to do it than to post it to YouTube and have the ability to share it with as many people as possible. So if you enjoy the video at the end, please feel free to share it with your friends and family by posting the link on your social media. We had a little snippet at the beginning of what paint and supplies we are using, so I just want to briefly show you again what I'm using. I'm using Artist Loft brand supply, which is Michael's craft store brand, and if you're not somewhere that carries Michael's brand, Liquitex student brand is also an excellent brand. So we're creating this entire Christmas painting with 3 colors. So first I have a deep blue, and then I have a turquoise, but you could also use a light blue, and then I have white. So those are the 3 colors I'm using. And what do we need to know about acrylic paint before we start? Well, one, it is water soluble, unlike oil paint, and what that means is it will wash out of your brushes and it will wash off of your hands with a little bit of soap and water. 2, acrylic paint dries very quickly, so when you're not using your brushes, please put them into your water because otherwise they'll dry in about 10 minutes. 3, if we start to put another coat of paint on before the first coat is dry, that first coat will come right back off. So you're going to hear me say a few times during this painting that we need to pause and take a break and let our piece dry. So I'm using 3 colors of paint. I have a foam plate to use for my palette. So anything you have that you could use for a palette might be a foam plate, it might be a plastic or regular plate. And what you can do with that is cover it with a little bit of saran wrap or foil. And then you don't damage the plate and you have a little palette. And then I'm using brushes. So I'll just zoom in on these. I'm using a wide brush. And my wide brush will be to paint my canvas, the background of my canvas. So we'll do all of the background painting with that. And then I have a couple of smaller brushes. So I have a medium tip brush, and then I have 2 smaller brushes, and we'll be doing the rest of the painting using these, and we'll also be using the ends of our brushes. And then I have my canvas here. This is a back stapled cotton canvas. You can see it stapled here, stretched over a frame, and this is cotton. And this is coated with something called gesso, and gesso is like a primer for a canvas, so that helps the paint to stick to your canvas. And then I have my water here as well. So having said that, now that you've gathered all of your supplies, let's get started. Okay, so we're ready to paint. What I need you to do is put some of your blue paint, some of your turquoise or your light blue, and some white onto your palette. We're going to start with our biggest brush, and what we're going to do is we're going to paint our background. So if you remember on the picture, our background was just a nice crazy mess of these 3 colors. What we're going to do is start with our white, we'll dip into our white, and we're going to start painting up in our top corner. And I'm going to dip into a little bit of my blue here, and you can see that mix is really nice. Now what I want you to notice while we're going is that I'm doing almost like a crisscross pattern with my brush. So you see how I'm going like this and this. So I'm not painting across like this. I'm doing almost like a crisscross pattern. So we're going to start with that, and we'll just do a nice little crisscross here. And what we plan on doing is covering the entire canvas. So once I have a little bit of this blue and a little bit of this white on my brush, I'm going to paint down the side edges of my canvas using those 2 colors. And I'll paint across the top edge and this side edge, and I'll paint across the bottom. I won't do that live now. I'll leave you to do that a little later. And so what we're going to do is cover most of our canvas, just doing this nice crisscross pattern. So we want to have enough paint on our brushes that we can really feel it sliding. So it should look wet. If it looks dry and you can see the texture of texture of the canvas coming through, then we need to have a little bit more paint on there. But also, we don't want it to be too thick, because we do want it to be able to dry within a few minutes. So you can see now, I've added a little bit more blue to this canvas. That really creates a nice effect. And it's okay if it's a little bit streaky. We want that. We don't want it to be perfect. Create a little bit more blue up here. I want to have a nice pattern. So if you have turquoise, you'll be using turquoise for this. And if you don't have the turquoise, you'll be using your light blue. And again, remember, as you notice, I'm still using this crisscross pattern. And you can see that I'm going quite quickly. And the reason I'm going quite quickly is because paint blends better when it's still wet. And remember a few minutes ago I said that paint dries really, really quickly, acrylic paint on canvas. So we want to get this done as quickly as we can. So that it still mixes, because it's nice and wet. So we also don't want to mix it too much, because we want to have lighter areas, darker areas. So come in here again, dip into my white. And have you noticed, I haven't cleaned my brush at all in between here. So I'm dipping between the white and the blue. I definitely have a dirty brush, but that's okay. You want to get that nice mix of color in there. Now I've got a little bit of extra paint here on the edge, so I'm just going to catch that. A little bit more blue here. And see how you can see my brush strokes throughout the painting? We want to leave those there. We don't want this to be perfectly blended. So we're going to leave those brush strokes there. So it's almost starting to look like a sky, isn't it? Now, I want to start adding a little bit of this darker blue. You might have been wondering when we were going to get to that. I'm going to start adding a little bit of that darker blue now. Doesn't that change the color of what we're doing? Still using the white, still using the lighter turquoise blue, but now this darker blue just adds an extra element of color to it. Keep going here. You might need to take a little break. Your arm might get tired. I know mine does. Keep going down. So you can see slowly we've gotten darker as we got toward the bottom. Did you notice that? So it's like the higher sky at the top, and now we're just getting a little bit darker at the bottom, but we're still using a bit of white in this. Okay, get all the way to the bottom here, getting even darker as we get close to the bottom. Okay, so one of the key things to make sure you don't do is keep blending over and over and over again, because A, your painting won't dry, B, you could pull up some of the paint that's already on there, and C, we don't want to blend it too much. Okay, just got that bottom little piece there. Okay, so you can see that we can see my brush strokes. We can see where the color changes in this canvas, and we can see just some bright little bursts of the darker blue in there, and I really like it like this. So what we're going to do now is once you finish this part, we're going to pause the video and take a little break while it dries. So I'll see you in a few minutes. Okay, so now that our background is dry, we're going to paint on our trees and our snowflakes. So for that, you're going to need some white on a palette, and you're also going to need a medium-sized brush and a thin brush. So I'm going to start with my medium-sized brush, and what I'm going to do is map out where my 3 trees are going to be. So I want them to be different heights. You don't want them to be all the same height. So I'm going to put one tree, the top of my tree is going to be there. Make one tree, the top of my tree is going to be here. And then one tree, the top of my tree is going to be here. So I've got 3 trees, 3 different heights. So what we want to do, and we don't need to be perfect about this, it does not need to be perfectly straight. We're going to bring this down. So I want you to bring down a little line, and then we're going to come a little further and a little further. But what I want to show you before we start that is when you're holding a paintbrush and you're painting, especially when you're painting a long line, if you notice, I'm holding my paintbrush the same way that I would hold a pencil. I'm not holding it back here, I'm holding it up here. And that's because I have more control over it. I want you to look. See how much my brush moves here. See how much my brush moves when I move my fingers. But watch how much this part of the brush moves when I just move my fingers the same amount, okay? So what we're doing is we're controlling how much it moves, and we want it to move around less because we're trying to paint straight lines. So we're going to hold it like this, and the other thing that can help you to keep it steady is to hold your hand with your other hand. So if you feel like, oh, it's really moving around and I'm really shaky, which happens a lot, then you can hold it with your other hand. You can also, because this is dry now, for now, you can rest your hand here as you bring it down. The other trick to keeping it straight is to bring it down a little bit, lift up and stop. Down again, lift up, so that you don't have to paint the entire tree in one movement. And again, trees aren't perfectly straight, so we're not going to worry about whether or not this is perfectly straight. And as we get down toward the bottom, what we're going to do is start to get a little wider with our brush. And why are we doing that? Because trees are wider at the bottom than they are at the top. So the bottom of a tree trunk and the top of a tree trunk are 2 very different widths. The bottom is quite wide and the top is quite narrow. So we're going to get wider as we go. So can you see how I did that? So you can tell that I'm wider at the bottom than I am at the top. Now, the other thing I want to mention, we're going to probably be doing 2 coats with our white. So if your first coat is very, very see-through, don't worry about that. If it's transparent, we're going to be doing a second coat on it. So then up here, I'm going to do the same thing. Notice how closely I'm holding it. Coming down, I'm going to lift up, get a little more paint on my brush. Come down. Now this tree is taller, so I think by the time I get to the bottom, I feel like this tree should be wider. So I'm going to start to get wider faster here. Now it's about as wide as this one is right at the bottom. Okay, so that tree is definitely wider than our first tree. And make sure that your tree trunk goes all the way to the bottom of the canvas. Next, we're going to do one over here. He's our smallest tree. Lift up, back down. He still gets wider at the bottom, but he won't be as wide as that middle tree. Okay, so now we have our 3 trees, the basis of our 3 trees. The next thing we're going to do is really fun, And what we're going to do is we're going to create our snowflakes around the trees in the background. So some of you, if you've ever taken a class with me, you've seen me do snowflakes by dipping the handle end of the brush into the paint and adding a snowflake. Well, we're going to do something a little bit different this time. So for teachers, I'm sorry, but the kids are about to get their hands a little bit messy. What we're going to do is we're going to dip with our medium brush in, and I want you to just make a little circle like this. A little circle like this. So we'll just do a couple there. But then what I want you to do is take your finger, and I want you to just move your finger in a little circle pattern. And what that does is turn your snowflake into this soft glow. Isn't that pretty? So what we're going to do is we're going to fill our sky with snowflakes. And what I want you to make sure of as we do that you don't put them in a row. So we don't want them all the same. We don't want them all like this in a line. We want to make sure that they're random. Some are closer together, some are further apart. And do about 4 or 5. And then come in and just use your index finger to turn that into a really nice little glow. Isn't that pretty? And if you finish this painting, you'll have a finger that looks like this. So you see, I'm just adding snowflakes here, there, and everywhere, and then I'm going back over. I'm just making this nice little glow. Now I'm sure you could do this with a Kleenex or tissue over your finger, but it wouldn't be nearly as fun as getting paint on yourself. Okay, come up here. Make sure you remember everywhere that you put a snowflake so that we can go in and smudge it. If you have a little extra paint on your finger, you can just make 1 or 2 without putting the paint down first. Okay. So you can see your sky starting to fill up with snowflakes, looking oh so pretty. And we'll just keep going like this until we have as many or as few as we want. You might not want a lot of snowflakes, or you might want it to look like a little blizzard. Maybe you're wishing for some snow to happen soon, or maybe it's already happened. Or maybe you live somewhere where you've never seen snow. I live somewhere where we have a lot of snow. I am in Ontario, Canada, and we have snow on the ground right now. And I know if you live somewhere where you've never seen snow, you think snow must be so fun. And it really is. Snow is a lot of fun. But it's also cold, and it's also wet, and it's also slushy. So it's fun, but sometimes it's annoying. But never when it's falling. It's always beautiful when it's falling. Okay, so look at this. We have most of our snowflakes on here now. Look how pretty that is. Isn't that beautiful? So while we wait for our tree trunks to dry, because we are going to do a second coat, you can still see through them, and we don't want to be able to see through them. We're going to start to do our branches, and I'm going to show you one of the secrets to painting trees. So oftentimes when people paint trees, they paint them so that the branches kind of stick straight out, and then the tree looks really funny, or they paint them so they go down. Everyone's painted a pine tree that goes down like this, and it looks kind of funny too. So I'm going to show you the easiest way to paint a tree. So we're going to start with just little branches at the very top, and we're going to paint it kind of like the letter U. And then we're going to get a little bit bigger, and a little bit bigger. Now what I want you to notice here do you notice that my branches aren't the same on both sides? That one branch is a lot longer than the other branch. And I want you to do the same thing, because you know what? Only on Christmas tree farms are all of the branches the same size. In real life, that's not how trees grow. So we're going to do some branches that are shorter and some branches that are longer. Now I want you to look, and we're just going to zoom in for a second. I want you to look and see, when I come down here, see how I come down and I drag my brush downward? Let me do that again so you can see it. I'm going to come down to my tree, and I don't just stop like that. I turn my brush, and that makes it look like the branches are going right out of the tree trunk. So it's very important. I'm going to show you again. That's what it looks like if I don't turn the brush and pull it downward. But when I turn it and pull it downward, it then looks like the branch is growing out of the tree, which is how it should look. Okay? So we're going to keep going all of the way down. The other thing I want you to notice on this as I'm going is that not all of my branches come out right across from each other. This branch is here, but then the next one is down a little bit. Now these two do come out across from each other, but sometimes it goes every other, staggered down, and sometimes it will be the same. So the biggest thing I want you to learn from this is to not create a pattern as you're going. So it never two things the same. So we have some branches that are longer, some branches that are shorter. Now I want you to start to get wider as you get about halfway down. And we're going to be adding, to some of these bigger branches, we'll be adding smaller branches to that as we go. For now, we're just going to add the big branches on the tree, but eventually we'll be adding smaller branches to it. Now, what do you do when you know as the tree is growing, it would go right off the page? Well, you make it go right off the page. So it looks like it's not ending there, but that it's continuing on. It's very interesting to the human eye when your eyes think the picture continues past what it can see on a canvas. Okay. I'm going to just come down here with this one. So I'm going to stop about here with this, and that's enough for now for this tree. We'll move on to the next tree. We're going to do the same thing. Now, don't rush this part. Don't need to rush it. You don't even need to go as fast as I'm going, because the great thing about watching a video is you can pause it. Okay, so I'm going to get bigger with this one. Now, I bet you might be wondering at this point, what if my trees come out? This tree's going to come out and it's going to touch this one, and that's perfectly fine. Remember to hold your brush close to where the bristles are. I like this painting because it's kind of like a silhouette, but it's so pretty because it's white, so it makes it look like it's a silhouette, but that the trees are covered in frost, which is so pretty. And it's okay when you start to get bigger branches, like on this big tree, it's okay for those branches to get a little thicker, because naturally they would be thicker on a larger tree. So now I'm going to run into this tree, and that's okay. going to put a small little branch in there. Just that's a big space, so I'm going to put a small little branch in there. I'm going to do one more branch out here. Notice it doesn't come out as far as the one above it. And I'm going to do one more on this side. That comes down to there. Okay, and now we have one more tree over here. We're applying the same techniques. And this is our smallest tree, so his branches probably won't get as wide as the other two, or maybe he's short but terribly round. So maybe his branches will come out wide. I guess we won't know until we paint it, will we? See how his branch is coming right off the canvas here, and that's great, that's perfectly fine. Okay, so we have 3 trees now on our canvas, and the next thing we're going to do is add some small branches to those trees. So I'm going to come in, and it's the same idea as what you did to create your bigger tree branches. We're going to do the same thing with the smaller ones, except this time they'll come off of these branches. So exactly the same way. I'm going to fill that in, so one side and the other side. Just like that. Down. And see when we start to fill that in how pretty that looks. And it's okay if your branches touch the branches above or below it. That's perfectly fine. Look at how pretty this tree is. Makes me think of the song Walking in a Winter Wonderland. I really like this painting because it's a great painting for Christmas, or it's a great painting for Hanukkah, or it's a great painting just to have for winter. It's one of those paintings that, you know, you can put it up in December, but you really wouldn't need to take it down until springtime. Because it's not specifically a Christmas tree, or it's not specifically a menorah. It's just something that looks wintry and peaceful. Look at how much our tree has filled in just by adding those branches. So remember, don't worry too much if you can still see through the branches, because we will be doing a second coat on it. And again, just remember, you don't have to rush. You don't have to keep up to my speed. The great thing about watching a video is that you can hit the pause button and pause it so that you can catch up or take a look at what you're doing. So teachers, if you feel as though students might need a little bit of catch-up time, now would be a good time for you to hit the pause button and just let everybody paint and get caught up until they're close to finish their second tree. And I'll just keep painting here. Notice how my branches aren't coming straight out from the branch that they're growing out of. I'm doing it on this angle, remember? So that it's like it grows up and out. It makes more sense like that. Looks more natural. And as your branches are bigger, it's okay for the little branches that come off to get larger as well. And notice none of mine are perfectly straight. They have a little wiggle in them, a little bend to them. Gives it character. So based on the color of the sky, I think it's probably almost nighttime in this painting. And I can just imagine, can you imagine what it must sound like with the snow gently falling? And these trees, it doesn't look like there's a wind. It's probably very quiet. The kind of night where when you walk outside, you can hear the snow crunching under your feet. Okay, so we have tree number 2 done. Now I want you to notice this tree's kind of lopsided, right? There's a branch that comes down further here, but not on this side. And that's the way trees are, so I'm not going to correct it. In fact, I quite like it. Now we're just going to come over and finish this side over here. One thing we want to be always careful of as we're painting is to not touch any spots that are wet. Okay, so once you've finished your first coat of your trees, just sit back, take a little look at it, see if there's anywhere else you'd like to add a branch, anything else you would like to add to it. And then, once you've decided you're finished, we're going to take another little break and we're going to let that dry. Okay, so now I have already started my second coat. I didn't think you all needed to sit and watch me do the same thing twice. So I've started my second coat and I'm going nice and thick over all of the trunks and then all of the branches. Do not worry about your branches widening on the second coat, they're going to. So if you look at this one, which has the second coat done, and this one, which I have not started yet, you'll notice that the branches are a little thicker on this tree. And that's just because you're going over it a second time. And of course it'll widen a little bit as you do that. That's perfectly fine. It kind of fills them out, makes it really nice. So what I want you to do is go over all of your brush strokes on your trees with a second coat of your white. So in some ways it's a little bit easier because you already have the branches there. You don't have to decide where they go. But in other ways it's a little bit harder because you have to trace over the exact same path that your brush took the first time. So that makes it a little bit tougher. So like I said, I finished this tree with a second coat. I'm now done this tree with a second coat. I'm going to move on to this one. And if you find that your brush feels very full of paint and the bristles are spreading out, give your brush a little rinse in your water cup and then load it back up again, and that you'll find that very helpful. So this would be a good point for teachers or parents or kids if you're watching this on your own. This would be a good point to pause the video again until you have finished your second coat on your branches. I'll just keep going here and finish mine. But if you want to pause, finish up your branches and then come back to the video. Okay, so just making sure I get everything with a second coat of white because we don't want our tree to be too transparent. Okay, so I'm just finishing up this last branch here. And then what I like to do, just as I'm finishing a painting, is just kind of sit back and take a look at it and decide if there's anything you'd like to change or just add to it. Maybe you'll look at it and think, oh, I'd like to add a few more snowflakes. Maybe I want a snowflake here, so add that snowflake there. Maybe I want a couple up here, so I'm gonna add those there. Now's a good opportunity, if you see any spaces where you feel really lacking in snowflakes, to just add those in. Do some a little smaller, some a little bigger. So if you add a couple of big snowflakes, I'll show you right here. If you add some big snowflakes, what that does is it looks like perspective. So it looks like those big snowflakes are a lot closer to you, and the smaller snowflakes are further in the distance. It's called an optical illusion. So those big giant snowflakes that you see, those are closer to you, or they appear as though they're closer to you. And then the tiny snowflakes, let's do a couple of really tiny ones. They will appear as though they're further in the distance. So when you're doing a painting, the closer something is, or the bigger something is, the closer it appears. The smaller it is, the further away it seems. Okay, so once you've finished and you're sure you have all of the snowflakes that you want on your page, you've also finished your trees. If you need to do a third coat because you feel like it's really, really transparent, you can still really see through the branches, and go ahead and do a third coat. And then there's only two things left to do. One is make sure you've painted all of your edges. If you haven't painted them already, go ahead and paint the sides of them, and I would paint them with a white probably if they're not already painted. And then the other thing left to do is sign your painting. Now, signing your painting can seem really, really stressful, especially because it's hard to write your name with a paintbrush. So what I recommend you do is get a little bit of paint on your brush, on your smallest brush, and just put your initials right in the bottom right-hand corner. And the less you press with your brush, the smaller the mark will be. So we don't want to press very much, just ever so lightly. And you can just do your initials just like that, right in the bottom corner. Now alternately, you could sign it on the side of your painting. If you didn't want it right on the front, you could put it on the side. When I'm doing my professional paintings, that's where my signature goes, is on the side or the spine of the painting. So this is our Winter Wonderland painting. I hope you all had a wonderful time, and check out my YouTube channel for more videos on painting and drawing. Thanks everyone.